Gotcha.
Good evening, everybody. It's 5:30 on April the 8th. We're going to call the Charter Commission review to order.
Ms. Berger. Here. Ms. Crawford.
Here.
Mr. Bentz.
Here.
Mr. Hochberg.
Here.
Ms. Stark. Here. Mr. Thomas.
Here.
And Ms. Heller is not here yet. So 6 present, we have a quorum.
All right. The second item on the agenda this evening is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, which would have been on March 25th, March 11th, because we were out March 25th because of spring break.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Motion by Nancy, second by Amy.
Ms. Crawford.
Yes.
Ms. Berger.
Yes.
Mr. Bentz.
Yes.
Mr. Hochberg.
Yes.
Ms. Stark.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
6 yeas, motion passes.
Item number 3 on the agenda this evening is public comment. I don't see any hands and we don't have any notes for any email messages to review. So moving forward. Revision of the work plan, Ms. Rebecca.
Yes, you should have received in the email distribution revision for our next 2 meetings. The remaining articles after tonight, frankly, should be pretty quick to review. And then May 13, we would come back and go through the charter beginning to end, any final questions, and then also recap for you all the process after you vote to approve. We were discussing this the other day at our pre-meeting planning session. You're going to be the ones that are stopped at the ballpark, stopped at the grocery store and asked, well, what happens now? And we want you to understand that very clearly so that you can effectively communicate the good work you've done as well as where it goes from here. So, Mr. Chair, I think probably an approval of a revised work plan is in order. And when I say final review, by the way, that would also be this recap of process.
A discussion from the committee on that. Does everybody agree with this revision plan?
Yes.
For the final review, it appears to be 3 weeks out from the final discussion on April 22nd versus the normal 2-week cadence. Is that intentional or?
I think there was a conflict.
Oh, is there?
I'm
First week of May.
forgetting what that was offhand.
I think instead of a pure 2-week cadence, we were doing a second and fourth Tuesday. Is that right?
Mhm.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Oh,
you know, you end up
yeah.
with that extra week phone and there's sometimes that may just be where that happens.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, you know, the other point to make is that gets us done before Memorial Day and does allow City Council more time to digest what recommendations have been made.
Yeah, so on May 13th, the plan is final review, but also a motion to approve and send forward your red line revisions to the charter. And then the thought is if we can get it done that night, which there's no reason we shouldn't be able to, then council can have it at their second meeting in May. And that gives ample time then to have several readings before they need to move on it, to have it done through their normal processes before we get to where it needs to be sent over to the Board of Elections. So.
We need a motion to approve the revision of the schedule and a second, if nobody objects.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Joey, second by Nancy.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Ms. Crawford.
Yes.
Mr. Bentz.
Yes.
Mr. Hochberg,
Yes.
Ms. Stark,
Yes.
Ms. Berger.
Yes.
6 yeas, motion passes.
That brings us to item 5, discuss Article 7, administrative departments and personnel systems.
If you, I don't know if you have laptops or have it printed out, if you turn to Article 7, one of the things that, in addition to the change throughout to city versus municipality and to city manager from administrator, is a revision of the chief of police suspension and removal to match what you approved for the city manager. And then just as a side note, I went back and made the same change for clerk of council. So all three reflect the Loudermill decision that we discussed at the last meeting. We can revisit that if you want, but this, I think, is more workable rather than tying the city to specific timeframes, and also accommodates a concern. You know, what if you want to suspend someone right away? And this would give you that latitude. Turning the page. Similar changes and references to city and so forth. If you look at 706, you'll see that that defaults to the city manager, in keeping with the duties of the city manager to appoint an acting head of a department or a division until a vacancy is filled, or there might be a temporary absence or disability. So that's in keeping with what you approved the last time. Another thing I did was to go through, you'll notice in 7.09A, we had in these latter sections a lot of references to when Sunbury becomes a city or upon the adoption of this charter kind of thing. So we're deleting, since we're beyond that, we're deleting those. So with that, happy to open it up to Mr. Bream or anyone else, Mr. Hennessy, for any further commentary.
No real commentary, not a lot of heavy lifting here, really. Glad to answer questions or turn it over to Daryl if there's any specific comments. If not, we can move on to the next article.
706, there was the exclusion for the police department previously. What was the purpose of that?
Well, that was back when the mayor was over the police department. And now we're looking to shift that to the administrator, just because he or she is present all the time, full-time position. Again, it was what Joe had kind of presented to you in one of those initial meetings. I just think as we progress, this is where we need to head. So it's just to be in compliance with it.
That makes sense.
Mr. Chair, are there any other questions about this article?
If so, no, thank you.
Then moving on to boards and commissions. Some of the similar changes. Then we got to 8.03, and it's a little different because on this particular board, you've got some automatic seats, 6-member board, mayor, automatic, member of council as determined by council, but automatic. Then you've got 4 members appointed, members from the community appointed to fill out the 6. And so we were debating on how best to make sure you didn't have the big turnover again, which led us back to the discussion of the overlapping terms for council, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Bream or Mr. Hennessy, but I think there's some thinking that maybe we don't make any changes for those council members and we leave the charter as it is.
So, and I'm pulling up, the relevant provision that Becky was referencing. And it's under the council.
My
Term
page
qualification,
4.
page 4.
Yeah,
So if you have your full charter or your charter to date, and you can get to page 4, the charter provides that the council, 7 members, including the mayor, and it kept with what we had at the time the charter was enacted, which was 4 council members coming up for a vote every 2 years, and 2 council members coming up for a vote every 2 years. And that was looked upon as, well, that's kind of funny that it's a 4 and a 2, because, you know, every 2 years you have this big glut, and, you know, sometimes it's hard to get, back in the day, it was hard to get 4 people to even run. We're twisting arms and things like that. And then the next 2 years, you've only got 2 council people. So I think as a whole historical carryover from that thought process, we were, well, maybe we need to fix that. Maybe we need to change it to a 3 and 3. But as we really got into reflecting on it, it's not really a 3, it's not really a 4 and 2 anymore, because the mayor is the 7th member of council. So really, it's a 4 and 3. 1 is the mayor, but you've got 2 council people and the mayor that get elected every 2 years. Then you've got 4 council people that get elected every 2 years. So to change the balance of it to a 3 council person, you'd really be overloading it the other way. Whereas now, you know, the most changeover you could have now would be 4 council people. As a straight ticket, you have 4 new people and they get their agenda and they want to run on something, and, you know, they have to get elected, first of all. So if they get elected, more power to them. But that could be a big change. But it would probably even be worse to have 3, after we talked about it, it'd probably be worse to have 3 council people and lose your mayor. At least if you had 4 new council people, you've got the same mayor, the same chair of council. So no matter how we do it, it had to be 4 and 3. So as we thought through it, this historical, you know, concern about being 4 and 2, well, it's really not anymore. It's 4 and 3. And we'd almost rather have it, the mayor be on the 3 side than the mayor be on the 4 side. So long story short, there was no change to that provision, or at least no recommended change. Doesn't mean you guys can't decide you want something different. But when the mayor and I talked about it, and Daryl and Rebecca, we just said, yeah, now that we're thinking about that. And the other problem with it was to try to fix it. It was out to about 2031 before we could ever change it, because of the 4-year terms and the fact that we've got people running in November before this will even be effective. So it would have been super hard to explain. It would have taken a long time to change it. And really, we thought it probably would be almost counterproductive to what we were thinking it might accomplish. So
actually, I misspoke, 2037.
any questions on that? So no recommended changes backwards. We talked about, let's think about it. We thought about it and thought about it. At least that's it.
And in your next iteration, it'll go back to the way it was. But we have a similar problem when we get to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And
so same thing for tonight, 8.03 Planning and Zoning Commission. Same but different problem in that this talks about filling the offices on the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's a 6-member board. To complicate it, you've got 2 automatic and permanent members. The mayor, in addition to the mayor, 1 of the council people. Again, and the remaining 4 members are to be appointed for 3-year terms to rotate. And then 1 of the 3 years has to be 2 to get to 4. Right, you got 1, 1, and 2. That's 4 every 3 years, for 3 years. Again, and the same thing, there was a lot of mental gymnastics that was had about this. Is there a way we could make it better? And really the end result was, well, not really. And further, we'd like the flexibility that was built in this, where the member of council, that term is flexible. It's, in addition to the mayor council shall appoint one of its members to be a member of the planning and zoning commission, who shall serve at the pleasure of council and shall be subject to such term on the planning and zoning commission as specified by the council, but not exceeding the remainder of that council member's term on council. So hypothetically, you could have a council member that just gets elected and they're appointed to a 4-year term. You could also hypothetically have a council person that says, okay, I'm willing to do a year. I'll try it. Or a council says, we want you to do a year, see if you like it, see if it's a fit. So there is some flexibility for them for council to somewhat control through the election process and through the appointment process of the one member, when they and how they take care of turnover. And they can look at, well, is it a 2-member? Are 2 members getting appointed this year? And we've got this person. So there is some control in there. We couldn't find a way really to improve upon it. So I guess that's a good thing. That's why we do this, is to look at it, find things we want to improve. And then to the extent we can say, gosh, we actually did that pretty well 5 years ago. And that's nothing wrong with that type of analysis either. So any questions on that? There were no administrative recommendations for changes coming out of it. So right now it will stay. Mayor is always a permanent member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Council appoints one member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they can choose, is it 1 year up to 4 years, but it goes through the balance of that person's term. Obviously, if they're not an elected council person anymore, they can't be the council representative to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
What about not just the mayor and the council representative, but the residents? And this might seem unfair, but I know when the BZA started, there were 1, 2, and 3-year terms so that it would eventually get caught up.
Yeah.
Is there the possibility of appointing incoming planning and zoning members that are willing to maybe do 1 or 2 years so that eventually you've got 2 residents on this 3-year term and 2 residents on a different 3-year term, or maybe they can all be on the same? I don't know.
As it's worded now, there's 4 at large. They get appointed for a 3-year term. Now, doesn't mean they're not indentured. They don't have to stay. They can quit or resign or, move, whatever. And then there's a replacement usually for the balance of the term. But no, right now it's 3 years. We talked about that 3-year term, and should we change it, to your point, in any way? That Planning and Zoning Commission position is tough. There's a lot going on. There's a big learning curve. We do the best we can administratively to bring people in. This is the code. This is what we're doing tonight. Here's my number. Call me, call Daryl, call anybody. But until you've done it, there's a big learning curve. So, and if we have, it's a monthly board. I think we've had at least 1 meeting canceled. So if on an average you have 10 or 11 meetings a month, you have most of them, but maybe not all. And again, it's a set month. If you're absent for a month, maybe you're doing this 8, 9 times a year. Not that many meetings, and not every meeting has the same stuff. One meeting you might have a rezoning, the next meeting you might have a conditional use, the next meeting it's a zoning certificate, the next meeting it's a lot split. Some meetings it's 2 of this and none of that. Well, I haven't seen that in 6 months, and that was so. Until you're there for at least a couple, 3 years, you don't have the repetition like you guys have, where you're just kind of doing the same stuff every night. It's different, and that code is pretty complicated, and there's a lot to it. You end up with a lot of participation, a lot of presentations, a lot of things to weigh in from engineering, from administrative, from legal, all those type of things. So we really just decided, gosh, I don't know that we want to go shorter than that. You know, we got to give them be fair to them to really give them the opportunity to really, you know, earn their stripes.
And I think it might be informative to look over at 8.04 and the Board of Zoning Appeals. In subsection A, it's easy because you have 6 and there's nobody coming on by virtue of charter provision. You have 6 residents, you can do 2, 2, and 2. That one's easier than planning commission.
But the charter does allow in both sections for shorter terms to be assigned as needed.
Well, if you look at the top of page 22, this is another one of those, upon adoption of this charter, council shall initially appoint. I was planning to take that out because we're already on a rubric. Caitlin had circulated the directory, and if you look on page 5, you don't have that one.
I'm happy.
But you've got the 4 residents, terms all ending in 2026. So, that's why we were thinking maybe to just have it read overlapping terms ending on December 31st, period. And keep that appointing ability with council, who obviously is tracking. And you're gonna have resignations, and you're gonna have people for various reasons not fulfilling their full term, and it's gonna get
Life happens,
really crazy.
jobs change.
Yeah.
The ability to appoint, I think, is going to be the saver there. Anybody else have anything?
This isn't a recommendation for change, it's just a question. Are there maximum amount of terms set that one can serve? And where my brain is coming from is that we will continue to grow. And I see that more people will want to become involved. And I'm sure that there's people on these different committees and, you know, that maybe have, you know, continued to serve for numerous years. But anyway, it's just a question. I
Good
didn't.
question, I think. 2 answers. As the council, no term limits, but it's an elected position. So the voters decide that. If they decide somebody after 12 years has been long enough and we need to move on, new blood, then they can do that. As to the zoning, there is also not term limits, but administratively, what we have determined, at least over the past, I don't know how many years, is that it's a merit-based application process. So if you're the incumbent, you have to apply along with, and we allow for application. So just because there's an incumbent that rolls over and they have interest in continuing, doesn't mean that they necessarily are the appointee.
Yeah, so maybe if I can add to that, so the last couple of years we've done that. So, and you guys are a good example of that. I mean, there are a whole bunch of new faces, not all new faces, but a whole bunch of new faces on this board that haven't been participating in boards and commissions in the past. By all the terms ending at the end of the calendar year, council then is soliciting input from people who are interested in serving and then kind of considering the whole sort of group. Trying to find the right mix of people to appoint. So I think and as David indicated, and we have gone out to the public every time to say, you know, if you're interested in serving, please let us know. In the past, maybe not quite as active in terms of the public outreach, but that's been where we've been the last couple of years. So I truly believe that we're seeing a lot more interest and participation on boards and commissions today than certainly where we were 2 years ago.
Any other questions or comments on this point? If not, the next thing I direct your attention to is 803 subsection C. And maybe call on Mr. Bream to describe for you what render final determinations for administrative action could be.
So this came up as a question in our administrative working group. Because the Planning and Zoning Commission is not an appellate body like the Board of Zoning Appeals. The Board of Zoning Appeals, that's its purpose, to hear appeals, right? An appeal would be, you don't like what the zoning inspector says.
Or you need a variance.
Or you need a variance from the code. That goes straight to the BZA. Planning and zoning, they are quasi-legislative. A lot of what they do is a review and an approval that goes on to council, like a change of zoning, development plans on PRD, that final platting goes through the zoning and the council. But there are some things that are not appellate in nature that the council does consider. Conditional uses, for instance, there are permitted uses in a zoning district. In a residential zoning district, a residential home, single family home may be a permitted use. You don't need to go to the zoning board if you're trying to build a home on a residentially zoned piece of property, right? But let's say you want to do a church or a school, that might be a conditional use, which means we anticipate it would be okay, but it has to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission prior to doing it, and they can put supplementary conditions on that about lighting or parking or noise or hours or whatever, right? Because it's something that isn't just strictly in the mainstream for that district. That just goes to Planning and Zoning Commission and goes no further. Once you get your conditional use, it's good to you. It's an individual approval. It doesn't go to successor property owners, but it doesn't have to go to council. So those that, as well as lot splits, goes strictly to the Planning and Zoning Commission. They don't go forward to council. These are minor lot splits, not full subdivisions, but we not unusual to have somebody that's got a 1 acre lot and they want to divide it into two so they can get the mother-in-law house or a kid's house or whatever on the balance of their property, and that comes for planning and zoning. So that would be an example of administrative determinations governing zoning that we thought was appropriate that language remain. So I don't know if any of you had that same question, but it came up in our working group. So that's the answer if you did. I'm glad to answer any further questions.
Then, as before, I stripped out some of the once Sunbury becomes a city upon adoption of this charter language. And that is pretty much the end of Article 8, unless there are any other questions. Preview of coming attractions. When we talk through Article 9, I just want to let you know I had one of my partners who specializes in construction law for public entities like cities suggest some changes, and these will be incorporated in the red line in Article 9. A lot of the rest of this is just general stuff, and then we'll need to go back and pick up any transitional provisions necessitated by the changes you've made throughout. So probably, my guess is probably another short meeting tonight and next week with the heavy lift coming for the final review. And that's really all I had for tonight. Is there anything else any member of the commission wants to bring up?
Just a question. I have not looked forward past today. But I didn't know if it was in here, or if it's something that we just talk about. Is I know in the beginning, it was discussed that this charter is to be reviewed. It began 5 years ago, but moving forward, reviewed every 10 years unless we decide otherwise. And that's just one thing that I have noted that I would like to maybe propose that change, or just open it obviously to discussion and talk about. I just wanted to make sure that is in our next meeting, or if it's something that we just need to talk about. And also so I don't forget between now and next month, not that I'd ever do that.
Do you feel that maybe it needs to be sooner or?
Yes.
I-
5.
I was curious about the same thing. I wasn't sure with all the major changes going on just in this
Yeah.
area of Ohio, like if there would be changes needed.
Think that there would be any harm, and I think it would only.
But also the cost. That was the only, I was going back and forth in my mind because I forget how much it's gonna cost to mail out all the changes in the charter to everybody. But I wasn't sure like if it's seen to not need changes in say 5 years from now, then there would be no cost, but I don't know, I've been going back and forth on that.
Initially, I thought the same thing. Maybe we should, do this again in 5 years rather than waiting to 10. But now that we've been through most of the process and seen some of the things that we've kept the same and some of the things that we've changed, maybe it's not necessary. Maybe the things that will change won't really affect the charter. If that makes sense.
That's true.
So is this the time to discuss that, or do
can.
we?
You can discuss it
Okay.
tonight, but it is coming
Okay.
forward in Article 12.
Okay,
So it's still coming attraction, so you
Great.
can ponder it. between now and
sleep
then.
on it.
I think all good points. It does allow for review as necessary anytime.
Mhm.
So after this one, 10 years, it will happen, but it could happen before that as necessary. So if staff or council or somebody identified, oh gosh, because of whatever, and whoever said things are changing around here, yeah. Are they ever? We decide there's something we want to capitalize on or we need to fix, then it can be done.
Okay.
It's on page 30 of your charter, if you have it. It spells it out.
12.01.
Okay.
So good to bring it up because I do think it's an important thing for all of you to have thought through. But that'll be, I guess, next meeting.
What if it's like a small change? Is that something that they're able to do without a charter? No, okay, I just wanted to just double check,
The one
like,
thing about a
it's
charter
simple.
is it is your constitution and it takes a lot to change it. And that takes a vote. So it takes heavy lifting, just like you're doing, even to change one thing. Now, that being said, there are a lot of cities that have amended their charters a lot. But I like to think it's because they didn't start with as a boring document. But that's in some part to the fact that we've learned their issues. This product that they work to full transparency and honesty, but
You could do a provision parallel to what was done the last time and say in 2030. And as often as necessary thereafter, or we can have it be something else.
Yeah, I'll think on it.
So speaking of the next meeting, I'm actually not going to be here. But I let Caitlin know that I'm gonna review, and if I have any questions or comments, I'll send them to her.
Don't really have anything else. I don't know if Mr. Hennessy, Mr. Bream, or Ms. Graff Miller has anything to add. One question, do you remember how much it costs to do the mailing?
It would be, I guess, I want to say, and Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure the mayor said between 5,000 and 7,000 possibly, but that's me trying to remember from weeks ago. So I will figure out those, don't hold me to it. I'll let you guys know for sure.
That might be helpful. Folks to know. think that's.
But that cost is gonna be what that cost is. There's no way around it. We don't have any way to deliver that stuff electronically, so it's just a cost of growing. It's a growing pain. So. Obviously, we'd like to be cost conscious, but there's no avoidance in that.
I think that's it from my standpoint.
Unless there's any other talking points, we need a motion to adjourn.
I motion.
Shannon, motion by Shannon and a second by Nancy. At 6:05.
Ms. Stark,
Yes.
Ms. Crawford,
Yes.
Mr. Rents,
Yes.
Mr. Hochberg,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Ms. Berger.
Yes.
6 yeas, we are adjourned. Thanks.
Yeah.
Feel like. Been going through it so fast, but.